A billionaire stood alone in his glass tower, staring at the city lights below, wondering if anyone would choose compassion over greed when handed unlimited power. He was about to find out, and what he discovered would shatter everything he believed about human nature. Listen closely, because what happens next will either restore your faith in humanity or break your heart into pieces you didn't know existed. This isn't just about money. It's about the moment when a stranger's single choice reveals the kind of person you've been searching for your entire life. And sometimes that moment comes wrapped in the most unexpected hands, holding the most unexpected heart. His name was Marcus Ashford, 42 years old, self-made, calculated, brilliant, and utterly alone. He had built an empire from nothing, a technology conglomerate that changed how millions lived their daily lives. Forbes called him visionary. Wall Street called him ruthless. But late at night in that towering penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a city that never stopped moving, Marcus called himself something else entirely: empty. He had everything money could buy and nothing money could give. Love had eluded him, or perhaps he had eluded it, too focused on quarterly reports and market shares to notice when genuine connection walked past him. His last relationship had ended 3 years ago when she told him, tears streaming down her face, that loving him was like loving a beautiful statue, cold and unchanging. So Marcus devised a test, an experiment, a way to find someone real in a world of facades. He would give 4 women his black card, unlimited access to his fortune for 24 hours, and watch what they did with it. No rules, no limitations, just pure, unfiltered choice. His assistant, David, a man who had been with him for 15 years, thought he was losing his mind. "Sir, this is insane. They could drain your accounts. They could disappear. They could—" Marcus raised one hand, silencing him. "Then I'll know exactly who they are, won't I?" His voice was calm, measured, the voice of a man who had made billion-dollar decisions in seconds. But beneath that calm, something else stirred. Hope, maybe, or desperation disguised as curiosity. The first woman was Vanessa Cartwright, 34, a marketing executive he had met at a charity gala 2 months prior. She was stunning, sophisticated, the kind of woman who turned heads when she entered a room and held attention with razor-sharp wit. When Marcus handed her the black card over champagne and candlelight at the city's most exclusive restaurant, her eyes widened just slightly before that practiced smile returned. "Are you serious?" she asked, her perfectly manicured fingers closing around the metal like it was destiny itself. "Completely serious," Marcus replied, watching her face with the intensity of a scientist observing a critical experiment. 24 hours. Do whatever makes you happy." Vanessa's happiness, it turned out, was expensive and predictable. Within 6 hours, she had charged $83,000. Luxury handbags, shoes that cost more than most people's monthly rent, a diamond bracelet, spa treatments, a reservation at a Michelin-starred restaurant where she brought 3 friends and ordered bottles of wine that collectors would weep to own. Marcus watched the transactions appear on his phone, each notification a small confirmation of what he already suspected. When he met her to retrieve the card, she was glowing, radiant with the satisfaction of consumption. "That was incredible," she breathed, kissing his cheek. "You're incredible." But her eyes, when they met his, were already calculating the next gift, the next gesture, the next transaction in whatever relationship they might build. Marcus smiled politely and knew he would never call her again. The second woman was Lauren Michaels, 29, an artist he had commissioned for a piece in his corporate headquarters. She was different from Vanessa, bohemian where Vanessa was polished, passionate about causes and justice where Vanessa was passionate about appearances. Marcus met her at her studio, a converted warehouse space filled with canvases that screamed with color and emotion. When he explained his proposition, she laughed, actually laughed, the sound echoing off concrete walls. "You're testing me," she said. "Not a question." "Maybe," Marcus admitted. "Does that bother you?" She took the card, turning it over in paint-stained fingers. "Everything bothers me, Marcus. That's why I paint." Lauren spent $47,000 in 24 hours. But unlike Vanessa, she didn't spend it on herself. She donated $20,000 to environmental organizations, bought supplies for underprivileged art programs, paid off her younger brother's student loans, and purchased a used car for her elderly neighbor whose transportation had died 3 months ago. When Marcus met her to collect the card, he felt something stir in his chest, something that might have been respect or recognition or the first whisper of genuine interest. "Why didn't you buy anything for yourself?" he asked. Lauren shrugged, handing back the card. "Because I already have everything I need. Other people don't." She paused, her dark eyes meeting his with uncomfortable directness. "You wanted to see if I was greedy. I wanted to show you I'm not. But here's what you should know, Marcus. This test of yours. It says more about your wounds than anyone else's character." She left him standing there, and for the first time in years, Marcus felt truly seen. The third woman was Christina Yang, 37, a corporate lawyer he had met during merger negotiations. She was brilliant, ambitious, a woman who had clawed her way to partner at her firm through sheer force of will and intellect. When Marcus proposed his test, she didn't hesitate, didn't question, just took the card with a knowing smile. "Let's see what 24 hours of freedom looks like," she said. Christina spent $112,000. She invested it, every single cent, in stocks, cryptocurrency, high-yield bonds, turning Marcus's money into more money with the precision of someone who understood that wealth wasn't about spending, but about multiplying. When she returned the card, along with a detailed portfolio of where every dollar had gone, Marcus was impressed despite himself. "You turned a test into a business opportunity," he observed. Christina's smile was sharp. "Isn't that what you would have done?" She wasn't wrong. But as he watched her leave, briefcase in hand, already taking a call from another client, Marcus realized that while he admired her mind, he didn't want to spend his life with someone who saw every moment as a transaction, every connection as a merger. 3 women, 3 different responses, and Marcus was beginning to think that maybe David had been right. Maybe this experiment was foolish. Maybe authentic connection couldn't be found through tests and trials. But he had committed to 4, and there was one more person waiting, one more chance to find whatever it was he was searching for in the hearts of strangers. Her name was Sarah Mitchell, and she would change everything. Sarah Mitchell was 31 years old, and she carried the weight of the world in her eyes. She was a single mother working 2 jobs, a waitress at the diner where Marcus sometimes grabbed coffee during his rare moments of normalcy, and a night shift clerk at a convenience store. She had a 6-year-old daughter named Emma, a child with a smile that could light up the darkest room, and a medical condition that could drain a bank account in days. Juvenile diabetes, the kind that required constant monitoring, insulin supplies, doctor visits, and a mother's endless vigilance. Sarah's ex-husband had left when Emma was 2, unable to handle the pressure, the responsibility, the reality that life doesn't always give you the fairy tale you expected. He sent a check sometimes, irregular and insufficient, but mostly he had simply vanished into his new life with his new wife and his new chance at pretending the past never happened. Marcus had noticed Sarah months ago, not because she was trying to be noticed, but because she wasn't. While other servers smiled with the practiced charm of people working for tips, Sarah's kindness was different, genuine, the kind that came from someone who understood struggle and still chose grace. She remembered his order, black coffee, no sugar, and she never tried to make small talk when he was clearly buried in his phone or paperwork. But once, on a particularly difficult morning after a deal had fallen through, she had simply placed a chocolate chip cookie beside his coffee, refusing payment. "Bad days deserve small mercies," she had said softly, already moving to the next table. That simple gesture had stayed with him, a tiny spark of humanity in his carefully constructed world of transactions and strategies. When Marcus approached Sarah about his experiment, they were in the diner during her break, 3 in the afternoon, the dead zone between lunch and dinner, when only the lonely and the lost occupied the worn booths. He explained his proposition carefully, watching her tired face for reactions. She listened without interrupting, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea she probably couldn't truly afford, but needed for the momentary warmth. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment, her gaze distant. "Why me?" she finally asked. Why not someone from your world, someone who understands wealth and knows how to navigate it? Marcus leaned forward, surprised by his own honesty. Because everyone from my world knows how to navigate it. I want to know what someone real would do. Someone who actually needs help. Sarah's laugh was soft and sad. You want to see if I'm noble or greedy, is that it? If the poor single mother will be virtuous or selfish when handed unlimited money? There was no bitterness in her voice, just a bone-deep exhaustion with being judged, being tested, being seen as a representative of her circumstances rather than a person. Marcus shook his head. I want to know who you are when you have the freedom to be anyone. She studied his face for a long moment, those tired eyes searching for something. Sincerity, maybe, or just confirmation that this wasn't some cruel joke. Finally, she nodded. Okay. But I need to pick up Emma from school first. Whatever I do, she comes with me. Sarah took the black card at 4:30 on a Tuesday afternoon, holding it like it might explode. Marcus had offered to accompany her to observe, but she had shaken her head firmly. If you're testing me, then trust me enough to let me make my choices without an audience. So he had agreed, watching her walk away with his assistant's assurances that every transaction would be tracked, monitored, recorded. David looked nervous. Marcus felt something else entirely, something that might have been anticipation or might have been the first trembling of hope after years of disappointment. The first transaction came at 5:15. A grocery store, $347. Marcus imagined her filling a cart for the first time in months, maybe years, without calculating every item, without putting things back, without that constant mental arithmetic of survival. The second transaction was at 6:30. A pediatric medical supply company, $8,200, insulin, testing strips, a continuous glucose monitor that her insurance had denied, supplies that would keep Emma stable and safe for months. Marcus felt his throat tighten. The third transaction was at 7:45. A children's bookstore, $162. He pictured Emma, this child he had never met, picking out books with wonder in her eyes, while her mother watched with the kind of joy that poverty makes precious. Then nothing. For hours, no transactions, no activity, and Marcus found himself pacing his penthouse, checking his phone obsessively, wondering what she was doing, where she had gone, if she was okay. David had gone home. The city lights blurred beyond the windows, and Marcus realized with sudden clarity that he wasn't worried about his money. He was worried about Sarah, about whether she was safe, whether she was happy, whether the weight she carried had lightened even briefly. The transactions resumed at 11:30 at night. A 24-hour pharmacy, $47, children's pain medication, vitamins, bandages, an all-night grocery, $53, more food, practical items, nothing extravagant. Then, at 12:15, something that made Marcus sit down heavily on his leather sofa, his hand pressed against his chest, where his heart was beating too hard. A payment to a landlord, $6,000. 3 months of back rent for someone named Maria Gonzalez, apartment 4C, the same building where Sarah lived. She was paying her neighbor's rent. The transactions continued through the night, and Marcus tracked each one with growing astonishment. She paid the utility bills for 3 families in her building, all overdue, all in danger of disconnection. She covered the cost of car repairs for an elderly man who needed his vehicle to get to dialysis. She bought winter coats and shoes for every child in Emma's first-grade class, arranged through the school office. She paid for groceries to be delivered to a women's shelter, feeding 50 people for 2 weeks. She covered the medical bills for a teenager's emergency dental surgery, someone she had apparently met at the convenience store where she worked nights. Every transaction was carefully chosen, deliberately aimed at needs she had witnessed, people she had known, pain she had recognized because she lived it herself. By the time dawn broke over the city, Sarah Mitchell had spent $73,000 of Marcus Ashford's money. And she hadn't bought herself a single thing beyond groceries, and Emma's medical supplies and those books that any child deserved to own. Sharing these soul-deep stories isn't easy, but if you feel the weight of these hidden bonds, of choices that define character, subscribe and join us. Your like can spread empathy, rippling out to touch hearts that need reminding of goodness. And your comment can share a story that touches another soul, creating connections in this vast digital world where we so often feel alone. Because these stories matter, your story matters. And together we remember what it means to be beautifully, imperfectly human. Marcus met Sarah at the diner the next morning, the same worn booth, the same afternoon dead zone. She looked more exhausted than ever, her eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep, but something else radiated from her too, something that might have been peace or satisfaction or the profound relief of having helped when help was needed. She handed him the black card across the table, her hands steady. "Thank you," she said simply. Marcus stared at her, this woman who had been given unlimited wealth and had used it to ease the suffering of everyone around her, who had seen abundance and thought first of scarcity in others' lives. "Why didn't you buy anything for yourself?" he asked, the same question he had asked Lauren, but meaning something different now, needing a different answer. Sarah smiled, tired and genuine. "Because I did buy something for myself. Peace, the kind you can't purchase at a store. The kind that comes from knowing you made someone's impossible day possible." But Marcus would soon learn that Sarah's story was more complex than simple nobility, that her choices carried secrets and sacrifices that would leave him speechless in ways he never anticipated. Marcus couldn't stop thinking about her. Days passed, then a week, and Sarah Mitchell occupied his mind in ways no business deal, no merger, no billion-dollar acquisition ever had. He found himself driving past the diner at odd hours, not stopping, just watching through the windows as she moved between tables, with that quiet efficiency, that gentle smile for strangers who would never know the depth of her character. David noticed, of course. David noticed everything. "You're different," his assistant observed one morning, setting down the daily briefing. "Since the experiment. Since her." Marcus didn't deny it. How could he? For the first time in years, he felt something other than the hollow satisfaction of accumulating more zeros in his bank account. He wanted to see her again, to talk to her, to understand the mathematics of a heart that gave when most people took. But every time he started to dial her number, which he had kept from the original arrangement, something stopped him. Fear, maybe. The recognition that someone like Sarah Mitchell, someone who had survived and stayed kind, who had suffered and chosen grace, might see right through him to the emptiness beneath his expensive suits and calculated charm. What could he possibly offer someone who measured wealth in peace rather than possessions? But fate, or perhaps simple routine, brought them together again 3 weeks after the experiment. Marcus was in the diner, seeking that black coffee and the strange comfort of normalcy, when Sarah approached his booth. She looked different, lighter somehow, as if the weight she carried had redistributed itself into something more manageable. "Can I sit?" she asked, and he nodded, suddenly nervous in a way that billion-dollar board meetings never made him nervous. She slid into the opposite seat, her hands folded on the table, and for a moment they just looked at each other, two people separated by wealth, but connected by something neither quite understood yet. "I need to tell you something," Sarah began, her voice soft but steady. "About that night, about the choices I made." Marcus leaned forward, his coffee forgotten. "You don't owe me explanations. You used the money beautifully, more beautifully than I imagined anyone could." She shook her head, a sad smile touching her lips. "You think I'm noble. Everyone who's heard about it thinks I'm some kind of saint, but the truth is more complicated than that, Marcus. The truth always is." Sarah told him then about Maria Gonzalez in apartment 4C, the woman whose rent she had paid. Maria was 67 years old, a grandmother raising her 2 granddaughters after her daughter had died of an overdose. Those little girls, 8 and 10, reminded Sarah of Emma, reminded her of fragility and resilience intertwined. But Maria was more than just a neighbor. 5 years ago, when Sarah's ex-husband had left and Sarah was drowning, literally unable to afford both rent and Emma's insulin, Maria had paid her rent for 2 months, money the elderly woman could not spare but gave anyway. "She never asked for it back," Sarah said, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Never made me feel small for needing help. She just said, 'One day when you can, you'll help someone else.' That's how we survive, Mija. We lift each other." So paying Maria's rent wasn't charity. It was repayment. It was honoring a debt of dignity. The utility bills she had covered belonged to families she knew were struggling, mothers who worked as hard as she did, and still couldn't make ends meet. The car repair for the elderly man was for Harold, who had driven her to the emergency room when Emma had her first severe hypoglycemic episode, refusing payment, staying with them through the frightening night. The winter coats for Emma's classmates were because Sarah remembered being the child in worn clothes, feeling the sting of other children's pity disguised as kindness. "I spent your money on everyone who had helped me when I had nothing," Sarah said quietly. "On everyone who reminded me that poverty doesn't erase goodness. I wasn't being selfless, Marcus. I was being grateful. There's a difference." But there was something else, something that made Sarah's voice drop even lower, something that carried shame she didn't deserve but felt anyway. "The night I had your card, Emma asked me if we could finally move out of our apartment. She's 6 years old and she already knows that our building isn't safe, that there are needles in the stairwell sometimes, that the heat doesn't work properly in winter. She asked if we could find a place with a yard, somewhere she could play without me worrying every second." Sarah's hands trembled slightly on the table. "And I had unlimited money in my pocket, Marcus. Unlimited. I could have put a down payment on a house, I could have moved us somewhere better, but I didn't." The confession hung between them, heavy and raw. "I spent all that money on other people, and I left my daughter in the same dangerous building, the same tiny apartment, the same circumstances that terrify me every single day. What kind of mother does that make me?" Her voice cracked on the last word, and Marcus saw the guilt that had been eating at her, the impossible choice between helping the community that had sustained her and protecting the child who was her entire world. Marcus reached across the table without thinking, covering her trembling hands with his own. "It makes you human," he said, and his voice carried a weight of emotion he hadn't known he could still feel. "It makes you someone who understands that you're not alone in this world, that your survival is tied to everyone else's survival. Emma has a mother who taught her the most important lesson anyone can learn, that we take care of each other." He paused, his throat tight. "But Sarah, you should have taken care of yourself too. You should have moved. You should have bought yourself something, anything that made your life easier." Sarah pulled her hands back gently, wiping at her eyes with the practiced discretion of someone used to crying privately. "I couldn't," she whispered. "Because the moment I start believing I deserve more than the people around me, the moment I put myself first when everyone else is drowning, I become the person who left me. I become my ex-husband, and I'd rather struggle with integrity than live comfortably with selfishness." If you've stayed with us this far, if you've felt the complexity of these impossible choices, hit that subscribe button and become part of our community. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts, your own experiences with the mathematics of survival and sacrifice. Your engagement helps us share more stories that matter, stories that remind us we're all navigating the beautiful, brutal challenge of being human together. And maybe, just maybe, your comment will be the thing that helps someone else feel less alone in their struggles. Marcus sat back, looking at this woman who had been given everything and taken nothing, who carried guilt for virtues that most people would celebrate. And he made a decision that would either heal both of them or reveal just how broken he truly was. "Sarah," he said carefully, "what if I told you I wasn't done with my experiment? What if I told you there's a second part, and this time you don't get a choice about accepting help?" She looked at him with suspicion and hope warring in her exhausted eyes. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that you passed a test you didn't know you were taking. You showed me what real character looks like, what actual wealth means. Now let me show you what it means when someone with resources recognizes real value." Marcus pulled out his phone, making a call while Sarah watched, confused and increasingly alarmed. When he hung up, he met her gaze steadily. "I just purchased your building, the whole thing, and as the new owner I'm making some immediate changes." Sarah's face went pale. "Marcus, no, you can't just—" "I can, and I did. First change, your rent is now $1 per month. Second change, every unit is being renovated to safety standards starting with yours. Third change, Maria and every other family you helped that night gets the same rent, same upgrades. Fourth change, there's a 3-bedroom apartment on the top floor with a small terrace that's being converted for you and Emma. It'll have a garden space where she can play safely. He watched Sarah's eyes fill with tears, watched her shake her head in denial, even as hope blossomed across her features. This isn't charity, Sarah. This is investment. I'm investing in the kind of person who makes the world worth living in. But what Marcus didn't tell her, what he was only beginning to understand himself, was that this was also survival. Because meeting Sarah Mitchell had cracked something open inside him, some frozen place that had protected him from feeling too much, from wanting too much, from risking too much. And now that it was open, now that he could feel again, he couldn't go back to the numbness that had defined his existence. The question was whether she could accept help from someone whose motives weren't entirely pure, someone who wanted to save her, partly because saving her might save him too. Sarah stared at Marcus across that diner booth, her world tilting on an axis she hadn't known could shift. Part of her wanted to accept with the desperate gratitude of someone who had been drowning and suddenly felt solid ground beneath her feet. But another part, the part that had survived abandonment and betrayal, the part that had learned to trust only what she could control, recoiled from the enormity of his gesture. "I can't accept this," she finally said, though her voice betrayed how much she wanted to. "Marcus, this is too much. I don't know what you expect in return, but I can't—" "I don't expect anything," he interrupted. But even as he said it, they both knew it wasn't entirely true. He expected something, maybe not consciously, maybe not anything he could articulate, but something lived in the space between his offer and her resistance. "I just want to help. You showed me what real generosity looks like. Let me show you that not everyone with money is incapable of using it for good." Sarah's laugh was sharp and pained. "You think that's what I'm afraid of? That you're not good?" She leaned forward, her exhausted eyes suddenly fierce with an honesty that cut through every pretense. "I'm afraid that this is a transaction I can't afford, that you'll help me and Emma, and we'll get used to stability, to safety, to not constantly living on the edge of catastrophe. And then one day you'll want something I can't give, or you'll lose interest in your charity project, and we'll be right back where we started, except now Emma will know what she's lost. It's easier to never have than to have and lose. My ex-husband taught me that lesson very well." The truth of her words hung between them, heavy with the kind of wisdom that only comes from having your heart broken in the most fundamental ways. Marcus felt something crack in his chest, a recognition of the damage they both carried, different in origin but similar in impact. "I'm not him," he said quietly. "I'm not going to disappear. I'm not going to make promises I can't keep." "You can't promise that," Sarah countered. "Nobody can. Life doesn't work that way. People leave, Marcus. They always leave. Either they walk away or they die or they just slowly become strangers to themselves and to you. The only person I can count on is me. That's the only certainty I have." And there it was, the walls built from necessity, the armor forged in the fire of abandonment. Marcus recognized it because he wore similar protection, different in style but identical in purpose. They were both fortresses, both convinced that safety meant isolation, that the only way to avoid betrayal was to never trust anyone completely. But sitting there, looking at this woman who had given everything to strangers and nothing to herself, Marcus realized something that terrified him more than any business risk ever had. He was falling in love with her. Not the practiced, performative love he had offered previous partners, not the transactional affection that fit neatly into his schedule between meetings. This was something raw and real and utterly inconvenient, the kind of feeling that made him want to be better, to do better, to actually deserve the space in her life he was trying to claim. "You're right," he admitted, and surprise flickered across Sarah's face. "I can't promise I won't leave. I can't promise life won't tear us apart in ways neither of us can predict. But I can promise that right now, in this moment, I see you. Not your poverty, not your struggles, not some noble, poor single mother narrative. I see Sarah Mitchell, a woman who understands the value of things I've spent my entire life accumulating and never truly possessing. And that terrifies me, because for the first time in my adult life I want something money can't buy." Sarah's hands trembled on the table. "What are you saying?" I'm saying that the experiment wasn't really about testing those 4 women. It was about testing myself, about figuring out if I was still capable of recognizing real value when I saw it. And you, Sarah." His voice broke slightly, surprising them both. "You reminded me what it means to be human, not successful or wealthy or impressive. Just human, flawed, and trying and choosing kindness, even when kindness is the hardest thing in the world." Tears slid down Sarah's cheeks, but she didn't wipe them away. "I don't know how to accept this. I don't know how to let someone help without feeling like I'm losing myself in the process." "Then don't accept it as help," Marcus said, an idea forming even as he spoke. "Accept it as partnership. You showed me what matters. Let me show you that having resources doesn't mean abandoning values. We'll figure it out together, messily, imperfectly, but together. And if I fail you, if I become someone you can't trust, you can walk away, knowing that at least for a while, we both tried to be better than our worst experiences taught us to be." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her gaze distant, calculating risks that couldn't be quantified, weighing possibilities against probabilities. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's one more thing you need to know. About Emma. About why her medical costs are so high, why I'm so terrified all the time." She took a shaking breath. "Emma's diabetes isn't just difficult to manage. She needs a continuous glucose monitor, an insulin pump, technology that my insurance barely covers and frequently denies. Last year, she went into diabetic ketoacidosis because I couldn't afford the supplies to keep her regulated. I almost lost her, Marcus. I sat in that hospital room watching my baby fight for her life because I couldn't afford $30 worth of testing strips." The guilt in her voice was crushing. "So when you offer to help, when you want to make things easier, part of me is screaming yes because maybe, finally, Emma can be safe. But another part is screaming that depending on you puts her at risk in a different way, that I'm gambling with my daughter's life on the hope that you'll stay." Marcus felt tears in his own eyes, a phenomenon so rare it shocked him. "Then let's not make it about hope. Let's make it about structure. I'll set up a medical trust for Emma, irrevocable, untouchable, completely separate from anything between us. Whether we work out or not, whether we're in each other's lives in a year or not, Emma will have everything she needs medically for the rest of her life. That's not charity or a bargaining chip or an investment. That's just what should happen for a child who deserves to be healthy." Sarah broke then, sobbing into her hands, years of terror and exhaustion and grinding responsibility pouring out in that worn diner booth. Marcus moved to her side, wrapping his arms around her shaking shoulders, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, he felt like his wealth actually meant something beyond numbers on a screen. When Sarah finally composed herself, mascara smeared and eyes red but somehow lighter, she looked at him with something that might have been the beginning of trust. "Okay," she said simply. "Okay, we can try." "But Marcus," she gripped his hand tightly, "I need you to understand that I'm not a project. I'm not broken and in need of fixing. I'm surviving and I'm doing it well, and if we're going to do this, whatever this is, you have to see me as your equal, not your charity case." "I never thought you were broken," Marcus replied honestly. "I thought I was." 6 months later, Marcus stood in the newly renovated apartment on the top floor of Sarah's building, watching Emma play in her small terrace garden. Giggling as she showed him the tomatoes she had grown from seeds, Sarah stood beside him, her hand in his, and the easy comfort between them spoke of late-night conversations and shared vulnerabilities, of learning to trust again, despite every instinct that screamed for self-protection. The building had been transformed, not into luxury condos that would displace the families who lived there, but into safe, dignified housing that honored the community Sarah loved. Maria still lived in 4C, but now with working heat and a bathroom that didn't leak. Harold's car was maintained by a mechanic Marcus had put on permanent retainer. The families Sarah had helped now helped each other, creating networks of support that money alone could never buy. Marcus had changed too, in ways both visible and invisible. He still ran his company, still made deals and attended meetings, but now he measured success differently. He had started a foundation focused on single parents, on creating systems that supported rather than punished poverty, on recognizing that most people weren't poor because they were lazy or irresponsible, but because the world was structured to keep them struggling. Sarah helped run it, bringing perspective and lived experience that no MBA could provide. Were they perfect? No. Did they argue about money and priorities and the best way to help without hurting? Constantly. Marcus struggled with wanting to solve everything immediately, throwing money at problems that needed time and systemic change. Sarah struggled with accepting help, with believing she deserved ease, with letting go of the hypervigilance that had kept her alive. But they were learning together that love wasn't about perfection. It was about choosing each other day after day, even when choosing was difficult. Emma called Marcus Marcus, not Dad, and he respected that boundary, understanding that trust with children moved at its own pace. But sometimes she would climb into his lap with a book, and he would read to her while Sarah worked on foundation proposals. And in those quiet moments, Marcus understood what he had been searching for during that experiment. Not someone who would pass a test, someone who would make him want to be worthy of passing hers. This has been the journey of souls, finding each other across the vast divide of circumstance of learning that wealth isn't measured in bank accounts, but in the courage to stay vulnerable, to keep choosing connection even when disconnection feels safer. If you felt the ache of loneliness, the fear of trusting again, the hope that maybe, just maybe, someone will see you for who you truly are, join our community. Subscribe to keep these stories alive. Share your own experiences in the comments below, and remember that your story, whatever it is, matters deeply. We're all navigating this beautiful, brutal existence together, and sometimes a shared story is the bridge between despair and hope. Thank you for being here. Thank you for staying. Your presence makes this space sacred.